Well, good morning and welcome to the Hope Chronicles on Friday, the 3rd of April. This morning, I'd like to ask and seek to answer with you the question whether God can provoke us and encourage us to spiritual growth through the arts. Now, of course, the major way that God speaks to us is through the scriptures, through prayer, through the ministry of the church, through wise counsel of other Christians around us. Of course, that's true. But in my own Christian walk, these almost 40 years that I've been walking with Christ, there have been other things that have stood out that have really provoked me to deep thought, reflection, and growth in my relationship with God. For example, the Pieta, the Michelangelo's statue of um, Mary with the dead form of Jesus, the cost to her, the cost to Christ, and just the loss that Good Friday represents. Some of the poems of R.S. Thomas, some of the works of Handel, uh, some of the paintings of John Martin, some pieces of choral and monastic music like Miserere Mei. These things have stirred me to greater reflection, greater study, and a deeper desire to really walk with God. So how does that work? How might that work? How does that fit into the growth of the spiritual life? Well, let me start by reading to you a challenging passage from 1 Samuel 16. And here we are at a time when King Saul, the scripture says, is afflicted by a spirit from God. Now, some of the translations say this is an evil spirit, but I'm troubled by that, the concept of God sending an evil spirit. It seems to me that doesn't fit in the context of who God is and his character revealed in the rest of the scriptures. And actually, when we look at the Hebrew, we see that it can mean evil, but it also can mean miserable or distressing spirit. And I think that's the kind of spirit that's meant here and that's operating on Saul. So I'm reading to you from 1 Samuel 16, beginning at verse 23. And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him. What we know is that David was a man of God. It says it earlier in the passage, the Lord is with him. It seems as though God is using David here to minister to Saul. What I think is happening here is this miserable spirit, this distressing spirit, is a spirit of conviction. A spirit of conviction of our wrong attitudes, our wrong way of thinking, our wrong way of living. And that, of course, is an unsettling thing to feel. We know that something's not right in us. We know that we need to get right with God. Sometimes we're simply not listening to what the scriptures are saying, but I think sometimes God uses the arts to speak to us in ways that can be quite subtle and profound. And here we hear David is playing music that ministers to the soul of Saul and allows him to find peace. So what is that music doing? I think that's an example of how the arts can allow us to take a moment of pause, can take us by surprise and translate us to another way of thinking which is accessible to God, which makes us accessible to God, and God speaks to us in some very subtle and yet powerful ways. And I think that was what was happening to Saul here, that God was ministering through David to Saul and seeking to draw him closer to himself. So that use of the arts, here it's music, and certainly music can stir us to deeper thoughts of God. It can be a painting, it could be a poem that just makes you reflect on your life and who God is. It could be a sunrise, something it just arrests you. You see it, and it's profoundly moving and takes you to a deeper thought of life and God. And in my own life, as I've thought about these type of things, there's kind of three key things that happen that I know that this may well be something that God is pointing me using. First and foremost, uh, it usually is something that isn't my normal experience of life. It's music that I'm not used to listening to. I grew up on Motown and punk for a while and New Romanticism and all those type of pieces of music. And yet suddenly I was engaged with choral and monastic music. And God used pieces of music like that to speak to me. So my experience is when God is going to get hold of us, he's going to come at us out of left field. And it's going to kind of arrest us because here's a piece of music, a painting or something we're just not used to looking at. We're not therefore in the cycle of just seeing something that or hearing something that we're used to. It's a new thing. Secondly, I think that this piece of music or art or whatever it is immediately has an effect on us. When I look at John Martin's painting Pandemonium, a picture of hell, it just gives me such an immediate response. And I don't think we warm up to these moments of engagement. I think that they arrest us immediately. And then finally, this that as we're engaged with this painting, this poem, this sunrise, there is an immediate sense of otherness. There is immediate sense of the presence of God in heaven, of the angelic host, that the place and the time and the moment becomes immensely thin. It says in Hebrews, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, those who have gone before us. There's this sense of our closeness to heaven. And in those moments in my life, God has really used that to convict me of some things, to encourage me, and to lead me on to a deeper walk with him. So I really would like to encourage you today, go on a hunt. Look at some art you've never looked at before. Listen to some music, the types of which you've never listened before. Look at things in a new way and see if God might speak to you today and draw you closer to Jesus Christ and a life of peace and faithfulness and compassion and joy through the arts. Well, the Lord bless you today as you search. Amen.